Ancient Egypt is a place full of mysteries, a civilization that is thousands of years away from us. Yet at the same time, we know a great deal about it thanks to archaeology and the study of history. However, many secrets remain undiscovered. There are aspects of Egyptian culture and religion that we are only now beginning to understand better. We all know the great Egyptian gods such as Ra, Osiris, and Amun, as well as many of the stories surrounding these figures. Most Egyptian beliefs, except during Akhenaten's religious revolution, can be seen as polytheistic. That is, they believed in multiple gods, each with a different role. But is there more to this story? Could ancient Egypt have preserved traces of a single, absolute god? And if that is true, what can it teach us about Egyptian religion? You will find out now, and at the end, share your opinion. When we talk about religions, we usually divide everything into simple categories, such as monotheism and polytheism. Monotheism is the belief in a single god, while polytheism is the belief in multiple gods. At first glance, these two ideas seem quite different, but historically, things have not always been as simple as we might imagine. In many monotheistic religions, especially in ancient times, there were lesser divine beings who followed God's commands. Meanwhile, in polytheistic religions, we sometimes find the idea of a single god who is more powerful than all the other gods. For example, in Hinduism, despite the presence of many gods and goddesses, there is the concept of Brahman, a singular, divine principle from which all other gods originate. In Shaivism, Shiva is also seen as the highest divine principle. In ancient Greece, although there were many gods on Mount Olympus, they also spoke of Zeus as the one god, the one who was above all others and controlled the world. And in many philosophies, such as those of Plato and Aristotle, the idea of a supreme being who orders the universe also appears. The Aztecs in Mesoamerica had the concept of Teotl, a divine force that created and sustained everything, including the other gods. And in ancient Arabia, before becoming known as Allah, the one God, there was already a concept of a supreme deity responsible for the creation of the world and above all other divinities. In other words, both in monotheistic and polytheistic religions, the idea of a supreme divine being who commands or stands above all other gods appears in different forms. In ancient Egypt, ideas about gods were much more complex than simply believing in many or just one god. For a long time, scholars debated whether the concept of a single god actually existed in Egypt. An Egyptologist, Eric Hornung, believed it did not, but later, another scholar, John Osman, argued that such an idea did exist. Let's see what the evidence can reveal about this. When we look at some texts from the later period of Egyptian history, such as writings from Hermetic literature, we find clues that the idea of a single god was already present. The famous Corpus Hermeticum, written in Alexandria during the Roman period, speaks of a singular god who encompasses all that exists. However, this was after Greek and Roman cultural influence in Egypt. So, the question remains, could this idea of a single god in the Hermetic tradition have older roots in Egypt? To understand this, we need to go back in time. Egyptian religion, as fascinating as it was clearly polytheistic, with the exception of the Amarna period, when Pharaoh Akhenaten attempted to introduce the worship of a single god, the solar disk, Aten. But in general, the Egyptians believed in many gods, each with a specific role in the world. They saw the sun as the god Ra himself and the entire world as a divine manifestation, where everything was connected to the gods. Cities had their own deities. For example, Thebes was the city of Amun, and Memphis was the city of Thoth. In practice, Egyptian religion was deeply intertwined with these gods. The people believed that the gods were behind everything that happened in nature, and that worshipping them was a way to maintain the balance of the universe, something called Ma'at, which meant cosmic order. This order had to be upheld by the pharaohs, who were responsible for ensuring justice and harmony. Therefore, while Egyptian religion appeared to be purely polytheistic, there was also an implicit concept of a superior being above all other gods, something that may have developed over time, especially during the Hellenistic period. The idea of a single god was not entirely new to the Egyptians, but perhaps it was more hidden between the lines of Egyptian theology. When we seek to understand the concept of a single god in ancient Egypt, especially as some scholars have attempted to do, we see that the issue is far more complex than it seems. Although the Egyptians believed in many gods, there are some clues that suggest that, at certain times, they also conceived of a single god, especially during the New Kingdom period. An Egyptologist named Jan Osman made a distinction between two types of theology: implicit theology and explicit theology. Implicit theology is linked to the worship of gods, rituals, and the way the Egyptians interpreted the world. Explicit theology, on the other hand, deals with more philosophical questions, such as the origin of the world and the nature of evil. In Egypt, these two ways of viewing religion coexisted, but with different approaches. To better understand this, we can look at a creation myth, the so-called Heliopolitan myth, which is a classic example of implicit theology. In this myth, we find the idea that the world emerged from a divine atom, the god Atum. Atum is described as the being that came from pre-existence and generated other gods such as Shu, Air, and Tefnut. The idea is that Atum is everything, but at the same time, nothing beyond being itself. He is the beginning of everything, from which everything originates and to which everything returns. In other words, he is not just one god among many, but the very beginning of the universe, from which all things come and to which all things return. This concept of Atum gives us a clue about something closer to a single god, superior to all other gods. This idea becomes clearer during the Middle Kingdom, when the concept of Atum as an absolute deity begins to emerge more prominently. Furthermore, over time, Egyptian theology became more profound, especially with texts related to the afterlife. These texts combined creation myths with a more philosophical view of divinity. One example of this is the description of Shu and Tefnut's offspring, who represent life and cosmic order. These gods were not seen as separate entities, but as parts of a greater unity that governed the universe. This leads us to the idea that the primordial god, Atum, is not only the creator but also the Lord of all, a concept that closely resembles that of a single god above all others. Atum is seen as the source of everything that exists. He creates everything from himself. Shu and Tefnut emerge from him, and other gods, such as Osiris, also originate from his essence. Instead of viewing these gods as separate entities, they are more like expressions of a single supreme divinity, which is Atum. Osiris, for example, is not just a god, but a direct reflection of Atum's essence, representing this divine unity. This concept of a single god, above all other gods, becomes even clearer in a text from the Middle Kingdom, where the singularity of God is directly stated. One generation of mortals follows another, but God, the all-knowing, has hidden himself, and there is no one who can resist the power of the Lord of the Hand, for he is the one who can withhold all eyes, whose images are made of precious stone and shaped from copper. These words indicate a vision of God that goes beyond traditional polytheism, pointing to a belief in a single God who is the creator and sustainer of the entire universe. During the New Kingdom, especially during the 18th and 19th dynasties, Amun became a central figure. When Amun was combined with Ra, he came to be seen as the creator of all things. This represented a continuation of the idea that began in the Middle Kingdom, but now more developed. Amun was not just an exalted deity, but the one and supreme God responsible for the creation of the universe. This period was one of great religious and intellectual growth. Although the polytheistic tradition remained strong, there was a growing emphasis on the idea of an absolute and singular God, like Amun, who ruled over everything. The emphasis on Amun's unity and centrality reveals the Egyptians' effort to understand the nature of the divine and how it manifests in the world. Furthermore, the cult of Amun Ra introduced a new way of understanding God. He was no longer just a distant idea or an abstract concept, but a personal God who could interact directly with people. Amun Ra came to be seen as one who hears prayers, helps the afflicted, and brings justice. He was described as the one who brings life, illuminates everyone's path, and is the source of love and beauty. This development marked an important shift in how God was perceived, making him closer and more accessible to the people. The sun god had always played an important role in Egyptian religion, but with Amun Ra, he became the creator of all things, the god who, by his will and word, created all other gods and the entire universe. This represented a great advancement in the understanding of God in ancient Egypt, and would have significant repercussions in future generations. John Osman describes Amun Ra as the god of life, one who speaks, hears, gives guidance, judges, discerns, and makes decisions. He is a god with consciousness and strong convictions, something personal, who demands devotion and choices from those who follow him. Amun Ra is more than a distant idea. He is someone with will, someone who calls you to act and live with purpose. As a being with the power to determine right and wrong, he becomes an ethical authority, something beyond just a belief. He connects directly with life and individual consciousness. The worship of Amun Ra brought a new way of viewing religion, especially in his role as the sun god. This new understanding of the sun at the center of worship became very significant and led to what scholars call the new solar theology. Many places began to set aside older mythologies and focused on Amun Ra as the primary god, as occurred during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. This shift in focus was also one of the key aspects of Akhenaten's revolution, which took Egyptian religion and transformed it by creating an almost monotheistic faith centered on the solar disk, Aten. He saw Aten and its light as the only true god, meaning that the worship of other gods, including Amun Ra, had to be abandoned. This was a radical change, but at the same time, it was a continuation of ideas that had already been discussed before. Although Akhenaten's religion did not survive after his death, the impact of this religious revolution was significant. It influenced how the Egyptians perceived the divine in the following years. During the 19th dynasty, for example, the idea that an individual could have a personal relationship with God became central, something that had been further developed from what had begun in the Middle Kingdom. At this time, it was believed that recognizing Amun and placing him in one's heart was essential to living in the light, while those who did not acknowledge him were in darkness. After the Amarna period, during which gods, especially Amun, were persecuted in favor of Aten, the worship of Amun became more internalized. Since people were forbidden to worship him in temples, they began to worship him in secret, within their hearts. This more intimate form of devotion continued throughout the 19th dynasty and beyond. By the Ramesside period, this idea of a singular god, yet encompassing multiple deities, evolved into a more complex vision. It was not exactly the monotheism that Akhenaten had tried to establish, but rather a vision of God as a great unity that encompassed and integrated all other gods. This pantheistic view of God, where he is unique yet manifests in various forms, was the peak of this new theology in Egypt. This God is the source of everything. He created all that exists and is the one who guides us, gives us life, and provides meaning. Life comes from him, and no one else can grant this gift. He is the light that dispels darkness and the air you breathe. Without him, no living being would exist, and you are the reason humanity continues to stand. He is life itself, the air that keeps us breathing, the light that brings clarity and drives away evil. He is in everything, in every piece of the cosmos, in the sky, on the earth, in the water, and in the air. He is the unity that spreads throughout the universe, manifesting in different gods and aspects of the world. This vision of God as something that is everything at the same time, where he is in all and is all, perfectly aligns with the idea of Pantheism. This was the foundation of Egyptian religion during the 19th dynasty and also influenced the philosophies of other cultures, such as the Greeks. Over time, ideas about God in Egypt evolved, going through different phases, from the Old Kingdom, through the challenges of the Amun Ra period, to the more refined conception that emerged in the 19th dynasty. This idea of God as something at the heart of everything has many similarities with the thoughts of philosophers like Plato. If you look at older texts, such as the Corpus Hermeticum, written in Egypt, you will see that they speak of a single God present in all reality. This shows us that the ideas about the divine in Egypt were not just an isolated invention, but part of a long tradition that also influenced other cultures over time. Religion in ancient Egypt is complex, and people have different opinions about it. What I have presented here is just one perspective, based on the work of Egyptologist John Osman, especially his book, The Search for God in Ancient Egypt. If you want to delve deeper, it is worth reading his book and exploring other studies to gain a more complete view of the subject. The history of ancient Egypt is always open to new discoveries, so everything discussed can be challenged by new evidence. However, I believe that the idea of continuity in religious expressions over time in Egypt makes perfect sense. If you enjoyed this content and want to keep exploring the mysteries of history and religion in ancient Egypt, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, we bring in-depth analyses and fascinating curiosities that you won't want to miss. Leave a like, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos, and share with others who love this topic too. See you next time.